Hi everyone, and welcome to this session where we'll be talking about Redis Inside and how it can improve your Redis developer experience. So my name is Olga Lopaci, and I'm the product manager for Redis Inside. Right, so the agenda for today will include a quick recap of what Redis Inside is, what's the latest in the world of Redis Inside, what are our plans for future, and we will conclude with a short demo at the end. Right, so let's dive in. So what is Redis Inside? Redis Inside is a visual tool for developers that empowers them to better use Redis today. So that's just a short description, but what does it really mean in actual terms, technical terms? So Redis Inside consists of a number of features or capabilities, and these include a data browser that allows you to quickly interact and manipulate your data in Redis. There's a CLI, which lets you run your commands directly against your Redis environment. It has support for a number of Redis modules. These include Redis JSON, Redis Search, Redis Graph, Redis Time Series, and Redis Gears. It also has a memory analysis, and that's exactly what it says in the tin. It runs an analysis of Redis memory, and it will provide you useful information, in case you need to troubleshoot or optimize your environment further. There's a slow log analysis that will point out the slow running queries. There's also a profiler which will give you an overview of your commands. So, for example, such metrics as how many commands have been run, top commands, how many clients connected. And also there's a bulk actions feature, which lets you prepare your commands and run them in bulk without the need, so the commands to do data manipulations without the need to write that, to put that down into a script. All right, so all of that allows you to quite efficiently visualize, interact, debug, troubleshoot, learn, and discover all things Redis related. So Redis Inside also operates on Windows, macOS, and Linux environments, and is also available as a Docker image. As mentioned, it will work with Redis Open Source, Redis Enterprise, Redis in the Cloud, and also the majority of Redis providers as a service as well. Right, so what's the latest with Redis Inside? We've recently released Redis version 1.10, so go and please check it out if you haven't yet. Also, since last conference, we've made some improvements to Redis Inside, but here are some of the highlights. So we introduced support for Redis JSON, support for Redis Search 2.0, support for Redis Gears, and support for Redis AI is coming out very, very soon. Also, there's improvements. We've done some improvements to the CLI, so we've added a command help and a command repeat, where you're able to repeat some of the commands you've previously run. You can now configure key bindings. In terms of browser, we've done some fixes to resizing, display, and filtering. We also quite excitedly introduced a new telemetry system. And that basically, the aim of that is to allow us to collect enough data to make informed decisions as to where we need to focus our attention, during the next versions of Redis Inside. Right. So telemetry. To note we have quite a good participation rate, about 41%, which is really good. And based on the data we've collected, to note that all of the data is anonymous. So we only look we try to understand where our user base, so Redis Inside users, are spending most of their time. And here you can see the breakdown. So we've noticed that 62%, understandably, of your activity is within the browser. 23% within CLI, the substantial activity with Redis Graph, Redis Search, and Streams. The rest of the features, they're being used to a lesser extent, so about 1% or less than that. Right, so the question is is this representative of your day-to-day behavior? Because we'd really like to hear to understand and the other side as well, if this is not representative. So please opt in to share telemetry. Either way, whether that represents your behavior or not, please do opt in, because we'd like to hear from even more than just 41% of our user base. Right. We also run a user survey. It's still running, where we've asked users to prioritize the 4 areas, meaning which ones of those matter most to them. So 40%, 45% mentioned that easy browsing, interacting with data is the most important thing in Redis Inside. Then having Redis Inside as an OS native application to run locally along with their IDE. So 31% mentioned that that's the most important thing to them. 14% mentioned that they would like, Redis Inside directly integrated with Redis, and 8% said that Redis Inside, they would like to see Redis Inside as an IDE plugin. So obviously these results help us understand where we should be focusing next, which brings me to the next slide. So what does the future hold for Redis Inside? So logically, it's a Redis Inside v2, but with a very specific focus, which will be on developer experience optimization. So what does that mean in actual terms? So we'll be focusing on 3 main areas. So that means we'd like to bring an intuitive navigation. And that means that we will be building the next version of Redis Inside with clarity, consistency, accessibility and discoverability in mind, so that when you're in one part of the application, you actually know what what your next step will be. You're not lost. You don't need to go and keep on checking. You don't need to go and checking Google what to do next. And then it's increased developer productivity. So we aim to decrease that time to market metric for developers, and that means a shorter development cycle. Also, very important and very dear area to me is the in-app guidance. We understand the importance of quick onboarding, of good documentation, and the ability to easily interact, learn, experiment, and understand Redis. Going just beyond just the cache use case in Redis. All right, so Redis Inside v2, we aim to have a public preview coming in August, but obviously we will have a beta release earlier than that. So if you'd like to participate in this beta program, please sign up here by following this link here. So we would welcome you and we'll contact you. So please sign up. Right, so let's dive into a demo. So for this demo, let's assume the role of someone who needs to implement a queuing system in a microservice-oriented architecture. And we decide to leverage Redis because it's fast. It's quite it's a quite fast key store library. So we'll be leveraging Redis, but we also would like to obfuscate the low-level details and the complexity. So we've chosen a wrapper to run on top of that, which will be the bool package for queuing system. It's a queuing system, and obviously before we even go into implementing a design or proper developing, we'd like to explore how this framework will work, so that we have enough information to make design decisions at a later stage. And also we're thinking, because bool and Redis, they're open source, we'd like perhaps in the future if we implement some features on top of bool, for example, we'd like to know the internal workings of it. So we'll be using Redis Inside in order to deconstruct how bool leverages Redis data structures. But regardless of that, regardless of the framework you use, of the programming language, whether there's a corresponding UI or not, as long as you use Redis, you can use Redis Inside to understand and query and easily interact with your Redis store. All right. To summarize, what's a queuing system? So a queuing system will have at least one producer that will publish jobs to the queue, and a consumer that will process those jobs off the queue. So in Bool, Bool manages jobs through a life cycle, and the diagram here represents that job life cycle. So job, once it's added to the queue, it can go through a number of states, depending on the options configured. So it can go into a waiting state, delayed state, eventually end up in a failed or completed state once all the retries have been exhausted. All right, so what we want to understand is basically how a job progresses through each stage. So our testing will do exactly that. So we'll look at the producer in isolation, we'll look at the consumer in isolation, and also we will look at a way to clear some of those jobs in particular state in case in the future we need to implement some sort of garbage collection. All right, so let's dive in. Right, so here at the top we have our IDE with 3 scripts. So a producer, a consumer, and a script to clear jobs. At the bottom here we have our Redis Inside v2 in a dark theme. Again, this is just a preview to note that some of the planned features are still lacking, but I think it's still a cool app to show at this stage. So it's running as a desktop application at the moment. All right, so here we're presented with the list of Redis databases as configured to be accessed from Redis Inside. So let's go ahead and navigate to the one of interest to us. So Redis Queue. We're presented here with, it's empty as we haven't run anything, but we're presented here with the classic view of, on your left-hand side you have your key list, and on your right-hand side you have your key details panel. All right, so let's go ahead and try and run our first script, which is the producer. To note, we have a few breakpoints scattered so that we can analyze the output of a script in Redis at different stages. So in a producer, we will add 3 different, 3 jobs with different options onto the queue. Okay, so let's go ahead and so basically what we're doing that is to analyze, how each of those jobs can add in a particular state. All right, so let's go ahead and run. So here to note that we are creating a queue called job queue. Right, so let's go ahead and run the next bit. Okay, so let's look at the debug console. As mentioned here, we're sending one job with just, a very basic body, no options configured. So let's go ahead and refresh our Redis Inside to see if anything has been added into the database. So yeah, indeed, we can see 3 different data structures added into Redis. And how I know all 3 of them are different is because in V2 we associate a particular colored label with a particular data structure. So these visual cues, they help, to draw your attention to a particular data structure of interest at that time. So in my case, for example, if there's a sea of hashes, I can find, that list, a data structure that's of interest to me. So since we are so let's go ahead and look at these structures and understand how, these are leveraged in this queuing system. So since we associate a queue with a list, let's go ahead and start with a queue here. So all 3 of these have been created as a result of our script running because all 3 of them contain the job queue name as pointed earlier. If I click on this, I can see there's one element in it, so I can safely infer from the actual name and the element in here, that's probably a list where jobs that are in a waiting state, it's keeping track of jobs in a waiting state. So indeed, the job ID number 1 has been added here. There's also a string, which probably points to the last job added onto the queue, but we can confirm that during our next run. So the hash here seems to contain the body of the job. So if we go navigate to the data, we can see that, yeah, indeed, process equal true. That's the body, matches the body here in debug console. All right, and a few more options in here, which, since we haven't provided any options to here, we can see that these haven't been set to anything. Right, so that's good. Let's go ahead and run the next part of the script. Now, we're sending another job, but this time we've also introduced an option, which is we would like to delay that job. All right, so let's refresh Redis Inside. Okay, so we have 2 more data structures added. So there's another hash added. So let's go ahead. So hash number 2, let's go ahead and check that. Yeah, the body matches. Yeah, it looks good. Process true, delay true. So same as here. Now, let's go ahead and validate that indeed the assumptions about the list and the strings, the string data structures are correct. So the list, since this is a waiting state, indeed it just has just 1, but we can also see another sorted set created here, which points to delayed state. Yes, so indeed it has the job number 2 in here, as instructed by our options here. All right, and then the string, indeed it's pointing to the last job published to a queue. Okay, now let's run the rest of the script, and we're adding another job. And since we want to see the unhappy paths as well, we've configured this job so that the intention is for it to fail at the when it will be consumed in the next script. So we'd like to see, a job that is completed. We'd like to see a job that's still in a delayed state, since we introduce a quite lengthy delay period, and we want to see a job that is in a failed state. So the consumer will basically, what we'll do, it will check this label here to process it or not. All right, so let's refresh again, and just to verify that our third job has been added into Redis. Delayed state the same, since we only have 1 job here, but waiting state, yep, we have 2 elements now, one pointing to ID 3 and ID 1. Okay, so let's exit this part of our testing and go to a consumer script. Right, so as mentioned, we expect 1 job to complete, 1 job to fail, and 1 job to stay as it is currently in a delayed state. So let's go ahead and run it and refresh, and let's see what's going to happen. Okay, so there's another string here, stalled check. Has a very short TTL, so probably some sort of transient data structure used internally by the bool, but we're not going to be worried too much about this at this point. So we do have 3 now sorted sets in Redis that, as from the name we can see that 1 is keeping track of failed jobs, 1 is keeping track of delayed jobs, and 1 is keeping track of completed jobs. So let's go ahead and validate that what we previously assumed is correct. So let's go ahead to the completed one. So yeah, job ID is part of this set. Delayed, yep, job ID is still in a delayed state, and failed, job ID 3 is in a failed state. So our assumptions have been confirmed. Now let's go ahead now and exit this script and try and clear, as mentioned before, we might at some point want to clear some of these jobs in particular states. So this script will attempt to clear any jobs that are in a delayed state. So that's job ID number 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it and refresh. Yep, as we can see, that set that was responsible for keeping track of delayed jobs has been deleted, and hash with the ID of 2 has also been cleared out. All right. So now you can see kind of the power of Redis Inside when you need to quickly interact with Redis during your perhaps debugging, developing, just testing, exploratory testing mode. All right, so that concludes our demo and our presentation. Hope you found it useful. And here are a few links that I would encourage you to follow to access more information on Redis Inside, to read a bit more on the modules, and also get in touch with us via Discord. And lastly, don't forget to sign up for our Redis Inside beta program. All right, thank you for listening to me, and good luck. Bye.